The first time I almost called her a thief, I did it with a click of my mouse. The second time, I followed her through the dark like she was a suspect. If that bothers you already, good. It should. My name is Owen Everett Holmes, and depending on who you ask, I'm either a success story or a warning sign. I run a development firm with my last name on the lobby wall, on the glass downtown on press releases that use words like visionary and disruptive, and on checks that get written to things labeled initiatives instead of people. On paper, I'm the guy you invite to talk about ethics, equity, innovation. In real life, at least until this happened, I was the guy who could walk through his own house and treat the woman who raised him like part of the furniture. You know what I mean, right? How you can get so used to someone's presence that you stop seeing the person and only see the role. Yeah, that was me. This story starts with something embarrassingly small. And if you've ever judged someone too fast, you're going to feel this. It was a Tuesday night late after one of those big conferences where smart people clap for charts. I'd just given a keynote on data-driven compassion. Yes, that's really what we called it. And people lined up for pictures told me I was sharp and grounded and exactly what leadership should look like. I smiled, shook hands. Checked the time. I left 2 minutes early because staying longer wasn't on my schedule. The drive home was quiet. I don't play music, it muddies the numbers in my head. Instead, I watched dashboards on my tablet at every red light. Project timelines, risk scores, sustainability metrics, my comfort zone. By the time the gates of my estate slid open automatically, I already knew revenue was up, emissions were down, and nothing in my world was out of place. The house lit up as my car approached, doors unlocked, temperature adjusted, that whole show. People think means you've made it. And right there, as the front door opened in her usual spot, stood Layla. "Welcome home, Mr. Holmes," she said with that same calm voice she'd been using since I was 5. She didn't hug me, never did. She never once tried to make herself the center of anything. She just made sure everything else worked. My breakfast, my school uniforms, my father's suits before he died, the house after my parents' accident. When grief turned that place into a museum, she stayed. She kept me fed, kept my nightmares from swallowing me whole. And I grew up somehow thinking of her as an employee with good longevity. If you feel a little disgusted at that, you're ahead of where I was. That night, after the speeches and the praise, I went into my office to do what I always did, check the systems. It was almost a reflex, like brushing my teeth. Security logs, environmental controls inventory. Everything smooth. Until I saw one small orange flag in the corner of the home management dashboard. Inventory discrepancy. 3 incidents in 21 days. I clicked. Pantry items. First aid cabinet, small stuff. Some cans, energy bars, antiseptic allergy meds. Not exactly diamond-level loss. The kind of thing anyone normal would ignore. The kind of thing a man like me cannot. So I pulled access logs. Only 4 people had after-hours clearance to that storage, me and my assistant, our head chef, and Layla. My assistant was out of the country. The chef hadn't worked nights in weeks. That left her. And there it was, clear on the screen, her keycard scanned in around 10:15 to 10:45 on each of the flagged nights. Click. Something cold shifted in my chest. Not rage, not some dramatic betrayal. Just this calculation. The kind where the numbers lean in a certain direction, and without even knowing the whole story, you feel your trust edge away from a person you thought you knew. I wish I could tell you my first thought was there must be a good reason. It wasn't. My first real unfiltered thought was, why didn't she tell me? Like my house, my food, My supplies were sacred assets, and she had dared to move them without clearance. If it were you, what would you have thought, honestly? Be real with yourself for a second. I shut down the screen, but the feeling didn't go away. I walked through that perfect house past marble counters. She wiped floors. She polished the dining table she set even when I ate alone. And it hit me that I knew the exact temperature she brewed my tea, but I did not know what bus she took home, what her rent cost, whether she had someone to talk to at night. The woman who walked me through my first funeral, who ironed my only suit when I was 12, so I could stand next to a closed casket without falling apart, had become in my head staff. That's how blindness looks when you dress it up nice. I barely slept. Not dramatic tossing, just lying there, staring at the ceiling while this quiet, boring question drilled into me. What do I actually know about her? The answer was ugly. The next day, I cleared my last meeting without explaining why. People assumed it was something important. In one sense, they were right. That night at 9:30, I was parked down the street from my own estate, like some stranger on a stakeout. Lights on timers, sprinklers running the whole place looked like a magazine spread. At 10:15, right on schedule, I saw her walk out the side gate. Long coat, the same worn cloth bag she always carried folded in the laundry room. No car, just Layla at her age walking to a bus stop under a flickering street lamp. So I followed. Yeah, I really did that. Bus through neighborhoods my company pretends to revitalize on glossy brochures. The high-end blocks gave way to cracked sidewalks, closed storefronts, corner stores with bars on the windows. She got off near a squat building that honestly looked abandoned from a distance. As I got closer, I saw the sign paint peeling, but still there. Community Youth Resource Center. Pattern interrupt. This is the part where I expected to feel relieved, right? That she wasn't heading to some pawn shop. I didn't. I stayed outside, walked to a side window and looked in. She was unpacking the bag. Food. Carefully packed leftovers. Containers of rice and vegetables roll soup. She laid them out on a folding table like it was Sunday dinner. Around her a line of kids ages maybe 5 to 12, all watching her like she was the sun. "Where's this from, Miss Layla?" a little girl asked. "From good people who have more than they need," she said, smiling. "And from us, making sure it gets here, while it still matters." And I just stood there in the dark, the so-called billionaire philanthropist, looking in like a thief on my own conscience. It hit me hard that those missing items weren't stolen, they were rescued. Things my system had tagged as waste, she had turned into dinner. But here's the twisted part of my brain I'm not proud of. I wasn't just moved. I was hurt. Not because she used the food, but because she didn't come to me. Because she had decided to work around me. Because somewhere inside her, the calculation said, he won't understand. He won't approve better. Not ask. If it were you, what would you have done right then? Walk in and thank her. Walk in and confront her. Call security. Or walk away and pretend you didn't see so you didn't have to change anything. I went home. At my desk, I pulled the logs again this time, letting the discomfort sit with me. I didn't fix it that night. I just stared at the lines. Her name, the flags, the tiny weight of my almost accusation. The next afternoon, I found myself in front of a building that made my car look like a joke. Beige, cracked steps, dented mailboxes with names handwritten in marker. The kind of place people in my circles talk about when they say those areas, and socioeconomic challenges like they're doing a case study, not talking about where children sleep. I climbed to apartment 2 and knocked. The boy who answered looked about 9. Thin, alert, standing like he was ready to run if this went wrong. "You Mr. Owen?" he asked. "I am," I said. "Is Layla here?" "She's at the center," he said. "She said if you ever came not to leave you in the hall. "You can come in." Yeah, that one went straight through me. I stepped inside. Tiny place clean, like someone scrubbed the baseboards, while the world was busy ignoring them. Old couch, little table, secondhand TV. On the wall, family pictures, church art, kids' drawings. On a shelf behind a plastic frame with a crack in it, a certificate, licensed practical nurse, state of New Jersey, 1986. "That's my grandma," the boy said. Following my eyes, she used to be a nurse, but some lady's family didn't want a black woman touching their baby, so she quit. "She works for you now." Twist, right there. Not only had I almost suspected my maid of stealing, I had never known she was once a nurse, that racism shoved her out of a job she earned, that working in my house was her second act, not her first choice. That's what I mean when I say blind. He poured me a glass of water and said matter-of-fact, "It's not that cold. The fridge is weird." He pointed at a faded newspaper clipping in another frame. My grandfather had a ribbon-cutting, big grin scissors raised. In the back of the photo, almost hidden Layla, with a clipboard, eyes on a much smaller me. "Grandma says you were quiet, always thinking," he said. "If you've ever had your own story handed back to you from someone else's angle, you know how that feels." I looked at the table and saw medical forms, a list of prescriptions. Insurance letters. All the paperwork of a life half supported, half drowning. Numbers I understood very well, just never in this context. When Layla finally came home and saw me there, she froze. Then her shoulders loosened, like she'd been expecting that door to open someday. "Well," she said, closing the door behind her. "I guess we're doing this. I saw you last night," I said. "At the center. The food, the kids, the logs at the house. I needed to understand." She listened without flinching, then put the bag on the counter. "I don't steal from you," she said. Steady voice. "I take what they mark to throw away. I check the dates, the seals, I make sure it's safe. The kids don't care if a label is crooked or a can has a dent. They care if they eat. Nobody pays me for that. It's just what needs doing." There was no apology in her tone. Just truth. "If you'd asked," I started. She cut me off softly. "If I'd asked, it would have needed permission. This way nobody has to pretend they're generous." We ended up eating together. Just rice and lentils. It hit harder than any tasting menu I've paid for. Her grandson set a third plate like it was obvious I should stay. On the drive home, the mansion made me uncomfortable. Everything too smooth. Too polished. I went straight to the system, reopened every flagged incident. And this time, I followed the data all the way through. Here's what I found. Most of those items were logged as near expiry or non-conforming stock. Stuff the chef had already flagged for disposal, but the final scan-out never happened. So the system thought it was still on the shelf. The meds, same thing, replaced, but not cleared. Packaging damage, almost expired antiseptic. It wasn't a heist. It was paperwork gaps. Human laziness. A machine doing what we told it, not what was true. The only person who had treated any of it with real responsibility was the one I almost suspected, so I wrote it down in her file. Discrepancy resolved. No theft. Human error. Mine. No one reads those notes. That one was for me. If you think the story ends there, with a nice apology, and everybody smiling in slow motion, you're underestimating how much I hadn't learned yet. Stick around because what happened next will blow your mind. A few days later, I went back to 2B. This time the air felt wrong the second I walked in. Louis was on the couch. Cheeks hot breath, shallow that wheeze you don't forget. Once you've heard it. A worn inhaler sat on the table, almost empty. "How long has this been going on?" I asked. "Few days." Layla said, folding a cloth on his forehead. "Clinic wait list is long. We're managing." That word again. Managing. Every time someone without a safety net says, "We're managing a part of me," Now we are one bill away from disaster. He needs a doctor, I said. We can't afford the ER, she replied, calm but firm. We'll figure it out. We are going, I said, tonight. That's charity. She shot back, and for the first time that I can remember, she looked at me not as an employer, but as a man who could be wrong. We are not your project. I took a breath. It's not charity. Call it back pay. Call it interest on everything I never saw. But let me do this. She searched my face for the performance, the ego, the angle. Didn't find it this time. She nodded once. Louis, get your shoes. At the hospital, I signed forms, answered insurance questions with, I've got it. Watched doctors and nurses do what she used to do before someone told her she didn't belong. Louis had a rough asthma flare bordering on pneumonia. They admitted him. 2 nights under observation, steroids, breathing treatments. Without that visit, we would be having a different conversation right now. I stayed. I sat in uncomfortable chairs instead of leather ones, listened to beeping machines instead of quarterly reports. At some point in the early morning, Layla draped a blanket over my shoulders and said, Get some rest, child, like she used to when I was small. Back at the office, my absence did not go unnoticed. My partner, Genevieve, walked into my office when I finally came in. Shut the door, dropped a folder on my desk. You missed 2 strategic planning sessions, she said, controlled. The board is nervous. Investors are asking if you're distracted. Where have you been? With my housekeeper's grandson at the hospital, I said. The optics on that are... Not ideal, she replied, pinching the bridge of her nose. We worked very hard to build an image. You can't just disappear into some personal crusade without a framework. There it was, that word. Framework. Do you think that's fair? I asked her that. Me spending 48 hours at a hospital bedside is more alarming to the board than the fact that the kid almost stopped breathing in an apartment our projects helped make unaffordable. That's not what I said, she snapped, but that's what it means. I answered quietly. She asked me if this was about guilt. I told her no. Guilt is quick. This was slower and heavier, like someone had finally turned the lights on in a room I'd been working in for decades. From there, I started making choices that didn't fit the version of me everyone was comfortable with. I kept going back to the center. Not with cameras, not with PR, just with books. Timed the occasional pizza my sleeves rolled up. A few kids started calling me Uncle O. One little girl leaned in and whispered, Are you the man who brings the space books? Like that was the best title in the world. It felt better than CEO. The volunteers didn't trust me at first. They've seen my type. People like me show up. Promise big, take pictures, vanish. So I sat down with them, not at the head of a board table, just in a circle of folding chairs that wobbled. I said, Here's the deal. I can fund this place in a way that doesn't make you dance for it. Monthly support. No branding slapped on your walls. You decide where it goes. I get reports for transparency, but no begging letters, no pity campaigns. Someone asked, What do you get in return? I get to know, I said, that my money finally landed where my mouth has been pretending to be. After everybody left, Layla came over, arms crossed. You know you just handed over control, right? She said. Maybe that's the point, I told her, but it still wasn't enough. Because the same structures that made her invisible in my house were alive and well in my boardroom. If I was serious, I had to walk this into the fire, not just keep it in the shadows where it made me feel personally redeemed. So at the next executive retreat, with all the glass and polished wood and bottled water, pretending to be neutral, I laid it out. I proposed an autonomous community fund, carved out of our profits, governed by people who actually live in the zip codes. Our maps love to color code. Teachers, organizers, grandparents. And I said one of those seats would go to Layla James. Silence. Then questions. What's the ROI? How does this help the brand? Are we opening ourselves up to risk? The return is stability. We can't fake, I said. The brand can survive telling the truth. The risk is that we might have to admit we've been benefiting from communities we barely look at. They didn't love it, but they saw finally that I wasn't asking. The motion passed. Some grudging yes votes, some sincere ones. Money moved, real money. Moved, real us. You might think that was the triumphant ending. It wasn't. The real final act belongs to Layla. She got an email from the city, an invitation to speak on a panel about education and community support. Her first reaction was to assume it was spam. The second was to assume they emailed the wrong person. I read to kids on Saturdays. She told me I make rice. I'm not some director. Then they finally invited the right kind of person. I said, if the room exists, you can walk into it. She thought about it. She said yes. The day of the event, she wore her best cardigan, polished her old shoes. No stylist, no speechwriter, just folded notes and a lifetime. The room was full of titles, principals, program managers, funders. Her name tag said simply, Layla James, community. When it was her turn, she stepped up, looked out at everyone, then put her notes down. I don't have a degree in any of this. She said, I have years of watching kids try to do homework in hallways, and mamas trying to decide between bus fare and dinner. I came here because somebody finally asked. She told them about the center, about sharing granola bars, 3 ways about making sure no child stood in line last. She told them about being invisible in big houses, cleaning up messes no one wanted to admit they made. She told them there are people holding this world together whose names never appear on the reports. Then she went off script. Years back, she said I helped raise a boy in a house that was too big and too quiet. I watched him build walls so high he couldn't see over them. I never blamed him. That wasn't my job. My job was to keep things steady in case he ever looked back. Recently, that boy has started to look. That tells me folks can change, even at the top. The room didn't explode. No standing ovation. Just this deep, slow, honest applause. People lined up after to ask her how to actually show up for their communities without making it about themselves. For once, they were listening to the right person. That night, Louie asked her on their little porch, "You gonna do more speeches now, Grandma?" Maybe she said, "Not for claps. For that one woman sitting in the back who thinks her voice don't count." Maybe she hears me and decides to stand up. And that right there is where this stops being the story of a rich man who finally woke up and becomes the story of how many people like Layla spend their whole lives holding us up while we don't bother to learn their full name. So here's the part that might bother you. It bothers me. Nothing I did, the hospital, the fund, the boardroom fight, erases the years I didn't ask. It doesn't fix the fact that she had to sneak near-expired food out of my kitchen instead of knowing she could just say, "Owen, these kids are hungry," and trust I'd move mountains. It doesn't fix the reality that for every Layla who finally gets a seat at the table, hundreds more are still standing in doorways holding keys they don't own. Do you think what I did is enough? Or is it just the bare minimum dressed up like redemption? If it were you in my position, what would you have done when you saw those missing items? If it were you in hers, how many times would you risk asking for help before you simply worked around the people who say they care? I'm not telling you this for praise. I'm telling you because I came close to failing the only person who never failed me, and the only reason I didn't is because a glitch in a system made me suspicious. That's not noble. That's luck. So now it's your turn. If this story hit you anywhere, if it pissed you off, if it made you think of someone you've overlooked, if it made you question who cleans your office, who packs your orders, who watches your kids, I want you to talk about it. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever had a Layla in your life, someone in the background who carried more than you ever noticed? Or maybe you are that person, and you're tired of people waking up this late. Tell me if you think I did the right thing, or if you think it shouldn't take this much drama for people with power to act human. Hit like if you believe invisible people deserve to be seen. Share this with someone who needs that uncomfortable nudge. Subscribe if you want more stories that don't paint over the messy truth with a feel-good slogan. And don't hold back in the comments. Agree, disagree. Call me out, tell your story. Because the moment we stop arguing about this, we go right back to walking past the people who have been quietly saving us all along.